Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from November 26, 2021, and I'm recording this on May 26, 2022. I give those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and changing. Typically, we don't actually have a list from this week. Typically, Thanksgiving week, they haven't really done the list in the past, but they did this time. So we have both Comic Tom and the Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week, as well as the CBSI Hot Top 10 to talk about this week. So we got 17 books between them. We look at those two lists. They're each a list of 10. We look at those two lists to get a feel for what were the books that were kind of trending in the moment, kind of the hot comics that people were chasing after, that were kind of jumping at pricing and prices. And we see what factors made them hit these lists, what factors cooled them off or has affected them since. So we all make a little better decisions about which books we chase in the moment, which books we're patient on. As you've been following this list, you'll know that this spring, the market has not been kind to these hot comic books, these books on these lists. They have all been dropping back pretty hard. This is a little better week, but still not great. So, but we'll get into this right now with Cowboy Bebop #1. This is the first U.S. Comic of Cowboy Bebop, back from 2002. Love this anime series. One of the first anime series I got into outside of like the Dragon Ball stuff and that kind of thing. Just a really great series. This was about the Netflix show that was coming out, and that's why this book was hitting the list. Raw copies of this were all the way up to $350 on average. A 9.8 was hitting $650. Now a raw copy will cost you $50 to $175. A 9.8. The one 9.8 sale was for $1,100. It's really because there's almost no 9.8s out there, but like all the vast majority of sales are the raw copies, and this book is definitely down in a trap. This series did not succeed. I don't know if it was because it was bad, but like Netflix canceled it. I felt like before I even had a chance to go try to watch it, within like a week of it being released, which I felt like it was really horrible timing for like actually getting any viewership for this. But they decided they didn't want any more of it. So this kind of failed a little bit, this live action version. The anime is still great, and I would suggest it for anyone that is an anime fan. Next, we have Earthworm Jim #1 from 1994, and this hit the list because rumors of a new animated show was coming. Raw copies for this were back then we're going for $50 on average. A 9.8 hit a high of $350. Now raw copies are $40 to $100. 9.8 going $300 to $400. So with one raw copy actually going for $2, which was just kind of insane. I predicted this to be something of a trap. I figured there wasn't going to be any real news about this, that it was going to be a while. There hasn't been any news, at least that I've heard, but this has still turned into kind of a worth it. It's up a little bit on the raw side, particularly on average. Not a lot. The average is still 60-ish, 65. 9.8s have been holding right in the same area they were. So yeah, this has actually performed really well. A little bit of a surprise for me. Typically, kind of going against the trend with these kind of option things, particularly with the animated series that usually like drop back because you usually have a pretty big delay. Next, we have Destroyer Duck #1, the first appearance of Gru the Wanderer. And this is another animated series that's supposedly coming back. Back then, raw copies were going for $60. A 9.6 hit $340. Good luck finding a 9.8. And now raw copies are going for $25 to $100. 9.6, $3 to $350. So this one is not really up, but it's been pretty steady. I still kind of put it as a worth it. As the copies are still kind of going for that range or slightly more. You can get a few deals on the raw side. But yeah, this one is up. So 2 straight that kind of buck the general trend. Guess there's a bigger audience for these two than I expected. With that, we're going to move into our last kind of, well, no, not our last one. More option news. We had actually 5 option TV show related things this week. And it is Proctor Valley Road, #1. And that was basically, again, option news. But this one was a little bit weird. This is one of those ones Tom puts on the list. It's a huge increase in sales, but didn't really move the value much. Raw copies were still on average at $4, which was cover. 9.8 went for 80. Now it's averaging $4 to $10 is the range kind of on raw copies. Generally about cover plus shipping. Occasionally one goes for 10, but yeah, still right in that same range. Now 9.8s are backed up. You can get those 30 to $60. So I still put this kind of down, and then I'll be back because there's way fewer sales. The values are the same or lower generally. So yeah, this is still kind of just an I'll be back. There's no reason to chase this when we got that option news. Next we have Noctera number 1. We'd had some option rumors before that it made this hit the list. This hit the list with the official announcement from Netflix that they were working on a show. It caused raw copies to jump up to an $18 average, which really means 15 to 20. 9.8s were going 120 to 180, which is really good for a book that's new. And this one I put as an I'll be back, and it actually turned into a trap. Raw copies haven't backed up that much, only 10 to 15 now. But there's a lot of 9.8s out there, and they're going 40 to 80, which is a huge drop from those 120 to 180 prices that we were seeing back in the fall. So yeah, Noctera, we'll see when the show comes and what kind of form it takes. But yeah, I think we're still a ways away, and the hype is down at the moment, at least. With that, we're going to move into our covers of the week. First up was Wonder Woman Black and Gold, number 6, the David Nakayama 1 in 25. If you guys have seen me the last month or so, the couple times that the number 5 Rose Best one hit the list, I was like, yeah, that cover didn't really interest me all that much, despite the audience for it. This number 6, I love this David Nakayama cover. I think this is super gorgeous. Back then, this 1 in 25 was going for 90 to 150, so we're talking 4 to 6 times ratio, which means it's usually going to be at least worth it, and this one has been. It's now a $115 to $200 book. 9.8s are going for $250 to $275. You could argue this is more than just worth it, that it's straight cash, which is a bit of a disappointment for me because I was actually hoping to get a copy of this, but I will not pay these prices. But it definitely has went up and has sustained those higher values. Like I said, follow the rules of 125. We got the quadruple ratio, then you know it's going to usually be pretty good, and that is what has happened here. Next, we have Superman, Son of Kal-El, number 1, the third print, 1 in 50 of The Kiss. So I kind of ripped on this one at the time because the moment is not in this book. It's in a later issue, but they put it on the cover of this book, and people went nuts for it. And raw copies back then were going for 150, and I thought, this is silly. The moment's not in the book. I was wrong. People don't care. I should have known better. The collecting market at the moment, for the most part, doesn't care as much about what's inside the book as they care about what's on the cover. And they've proven that over and over again. That's the case here. Raw copies of this are now $200 to $300. 9.8 going for $900 to $1,000. They got the moment on the cover. They're not worried about that it's not in this particular book. They want it. It's up. It's straight cash. It's just the way it's been. So I was wrong on this because I really thought what would hold this back was that it's not a part of this actual book. The cover doesn't really associate with anything in the book. People don't care. Next, we got Street Fighter versus Darkstalkers, number 0, this Joe Vren's variant. Back then it was going, raw copies were going for 65, and 9.8 was going for 120 for this fairly hard to find cover. Because back then it was like there were 2 sales, but there was no other listings when I looked at it. There's been no sales in the last 3 months on this particular cover. There are currently 2 listings, but they are way higher than those sale prices back then, with the raw listing for 110, a 9.8 listing for 750. So it's hard to judge what's going on with this book. This kind of appears to be a bit of a ghost. People are trying to push the value even higher. So far, there hasn't been an audience for that. But they're not really pushing it a little bit higher, like way higher. And that's probably why. So I kind of put this as a steady on here that, probably if it was listed down around what it sold for 6 months ago, they might sell. We won't know because they're not. But there's just no real way to judge this. So I just kind of threw this in the steady category. Next, we got War of the Realms, New Agents of Atlas #1. The Patrick Zurcher 1 in 50. This has multiple first appearance in it. And this 1 in 50 hits already jumped up to, back then a 9.8 was going for $1,700, which was a huge move. Whereas the cover A of this book with all these same first appearances was only going for $175 in a 9.8. We'll say this, there was only 3 sales of 9.8 here recently, and like I said, it's now down around $1,100. So this one is backed up, for sure, definitely an I'll be back, but still a fairly tough to find cover and a lot of first appearances that haven't panned out yet, but people think will. So in terms of live action or that kind of stuff. All right, with that, we're going to move into a couple of Star Wars books. And first up is Kanan the Last Padawan #1. The first appearance of Sabine Wren. There's an argument whether this is a cameo or a full appearance. CGC, I think, still listed as the first appearance. And this hit the list because we got official casting finally for Sabine. We'd known she was coming for a long time, but we got casting news. Raw copies on this jumped up to $80. 9.8s were pushing $350. Now a raw copy will cost you $50 to $125. 9.8s are costing it $2 to $325. Pretty good. This would probably be worth it. It would stay kind of in this range. It did not. It has backed up a little bit. So it is turned into an I'll be back for this particular book. And that's kind of the same story with Kanan the Last Padawan #6, hitting them for the same reasons. This is what everyone, the market is saying is the first full appearance of Sabine. Plus, she's on the cover, which is always, the bonus. Like I said, covers seem to matter more than the content sometimes. Raw copies back then were going for $135 on average. 9.8 were up to $700. And now it's, like I said, also an I'll be back. Raws are now $100 to $200, so kind of in that same range. But 9.8s are down $400 to $700. So definitely a little bit of an I'll be back here on these 2 Sabine books. Still a lot of interest. We know the Ahsoka show is coming. We might get more information about exactly when here in the next day or so at Star Wars Celebration. We'll just have to see. Next, we have Hit Monkey #1, the second print of the first appearance of Hit Monkey. Obviously, this was right during when the show was being released. The second print was hitting $700 to $800 in a 9.8 back then. The show got super good reviews. Hasn't stopped these Hit Monkey books from backing up as we've moved away from it. Now a raw copy will cost you $90 to $150. The only recent 9.8 sale went for $590. So definitely an I'll be back on Hit Monkey. Borderline trap, but definitely an I'll be back here. That if you've been a little bit patient, got away from the show, you could have done better. Next, we have the rest of this list is kind of Marvel, MCU, spec kind of stuff. We got A-Force #1, the first A-Force team appearance. Basically, this is spec based on Kevin Feige making some comments that maybe Scarlett Johansson wasn't done with the MCU, that there might be ways to bring her back or whatever, and some other comments that he kind of made that people were like, ooh, that kind of sounds like maybe A-Force. So back then, raw copies jumped up to $20. A 9.8 jumped up to $80 to $180. Now it's a $10 to $25 book. So a little bit of an I'll be back on the raw side. Same thing kind of on the 9.8 side, $75 to $150. So kind of a little in the same range, but shifted down a little bit. You could argue worth it. I put it as I'll be back because you can definitely find them a little cheaper consistently than what they were back then. Next, we got Ultimate Fallout 4, first appearance of Miles Morales. And this had to do with Tom Holland making comments about maybe not doing Spider-Man anymore and that maybe it was time for Miles. So that's what had this jumping back on the list for the 8 millionth time. Back then, raw copies were averaging about 780. 9.8s were back up to $3,000. And this is pretty much where this book is at now. It's a $600 to $1,100 book for a raw copy. 9.8, $27 to $3,100. So I'm just kind of putting this as worth it at this point. This is kind of where the range is on Miles, this Ultimate Fallout 4 at this point. I think it's going to take like casting or something like that to actually move this book significantly again. We'll see. Next, we have 3 books related to the Daredevil or to the Hawkeye show, which just kicked off when this list came out. We have Daredevil number 11, the first appearance of Maya Lopez as Echo, so the first time she uses the Echo name. Back then, 9.8 of this, we're going for $250 with her appearing in the Hawkeye show. Now, raw copies are 10 to 30. 9.8 are only going to cost you $120 to $150. So this one definitely turned into a bit of a trap, even with the announcement just this week. Like when I looked at values yesterday, like the announcement just this week that they revealed a new logo. We know we're getting a show with her as the focus. Still hasn't kept this particular book from dropping back. The next book is Hawkeye number 2, which is the first team up of Clint and Kate. Back then, raw copies were $20 to $50. I only put this as an I'll be back, which is foolish. I should have said trap. These first meetups, these kind of things, they just don't seem to hold. Like there's just a run on them for whatever reason. People jump on these books and they do not hold very well, particularly if they're based on a show or a moment in a show. Now it's a $5 to $20 book. 9.8 only going for $60. This is definitely a trap. We've moved away from the Hawkeye show, and everything Kate Bishop at the moment or Hawkeye is super cold. And that's just where we're at here 6 months after the show started coming out. Even though people kind of enjoyed the show, it doesn't matter. Next, we have Hawkeye number 11. First appearance of the solo issue, kind of a Lucky the Pizza Dog. This is the issue focused completely on the dog and told from his perspective. Back then, raw copies were going for 40 plus with him appearing in the show. Now it's a $10 to $25 book. 9.8 again, around $60. Another book that's a trap. It's a really cool issue. If you've never read this run or read this issue, I highly recommend it because it is pretty cool. So that is our list this week, 17 books. We did a little better than typical. We had 3 books that actually went up, 4 books that stayed pretty steady, and then 10 books that dropped down. So this is a much more positive week than typical, even with 10 of the 17 books dropping. So that just tells you how bad things have been. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you next time.